So here we are, folks, and I'm sorry we're a couple minutes late. I am still learning the technology here, and it's good to be with you, each one here, as we come to the end times update, and very much excited about the topic tonight. A few things to get right into. A reminder that what we're doing is starting these sessions here on Thursday nights, doing an update where we take a specific prophecy. We were going to have them numbered. We're working through, in fact, the first 17 prophecies, and these are all some that Jesus gave, and then we're going to be adding others as were shared by Apostle Paul, John, Apostle, and Revelation, and some Old Testament prophets, and see how they all fit in with what Jesus said. But we're going to have them numbered so that we can start matching up and finding the fulfillments of those prophecies in modern day. We are there. I don't know how to say this more clear, more plain. I know every generation has said this since the time of Christ, and hindsight is 2020. They say, well, you can see back through the ages that what they didn't have in human history that were fulfillments, they're happening now. And I think if you watch and study this enough, you will become convinced of that. It won't be something I'll have to convince you of if you're studying. But let's go ahead and jump into, with that in mind, jump into some of these updates here. I'm going to go ahead now and go to the split screen and start the presentation. This P2 means that's the second prophecy that Jesus spoke of there in Matthew 24, when he talked about there'd be wars and rumors of wars. And I know, and I'm going to again qualify this right at the onset, in that many people do feel that, there have been wars and rumors of wars for years, so how would you ever know if this was an end time factor? And as you'll see as we talk prophecies, there are a couple of things that really stand out, that really become more and more evident as we think on the prophecies. One is the intensity, and two is what happens on the big scale, a wide scale, which is new to this generation and maybe the one before, but especially this one. I mean, it was not long after I was born, and I'll tell you, it was back in the 1959, that the first intercontinental newscast on TV was shared. So, I mean, it's been in my lifetime that we now started having this wider scale communication, global communication. And so that's something that plays in and gives new meaning to the word rumors, because even though there have always been, yes, wars and rumors of wars long before Christ gave this prophecy, what has changed is how the rumors are made known and who hears the rumors in terms of mass scale. So it's the intensity and it's the broad scale. And one of the things I'd like you to start listening to more and more is the references in the scripture that talk about many or all peoples, all nations. What you're going to find is that has never fit in the history of mankind like it does in our time now. So with that said, here's one. We're calling prophecy 2. Jesus said there'd be wars and rumors of wars. And here just this week, I find it so interesting that Putin appoints a new commander nicknamed Armageddon. Isn't that interesting? And he's nicknamed Armageddon because of his ruthless leadership as an army commander, in his ruthlessness in destroying whoever and whatever is needed to win. And that's quite interesting, quite amazing to me that this word Armageddon is being thrown around. In fact, I've heard it 2 or 3 times, 2 to 3 different ways, but for time's sake tonight, we'll just leave here with this one for now. Let's go to another thing about prophecy 2 on wars and rumors of wars, and that is Putin did something else of great interest. In fact, that was just in the last day or so. And that is he warns that all world infrastructure is at risk of terror attacks. Now, he's talking in part because not only have there been accusations of him possibly doing something with those gas lines, Nord Stream over there, and how that they provide Europe with the natural gas and heating resources. there were Russian ships, Navy ships seen in the area, and it is thought, speculation, I'm thinking still, though some are very convinced, even in the American intelligence areas, that he did this. And here he is making it known that the infrastructure, that which supplies the world with fuel, is at risk, whether it's an electrical grid or gas lines, whether on ground or under the water. He's saying they're all at risk. And you talk about fitting the whole scene here of world chaos. That is a statement, a mouthful right there, just to hear that thought. All world infrastructure at risk of terror attack. Let's go to the next one. And that is here with the global events, both good and bad. Now, last week we gave a quote from the IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund. But this week, believe it or not, here is a headline that is clearly showing it's gained traction worldwide. It's not just the International Monetary Fund. The World Bank and chiefs are issuing dire warnings on recession and inflation. Well, that may not seem so very unusual until you start thinking about the global economy and what else is happening around the world. So when we have these prophecies 8 through 12, and for those of you who will be interested in a list, feel free to email me. I'll give that email address here shortly. It's pretty easy. In fact, I'll say it now. You just need the spelling right on Carey, but there at the bottom where it says David Carey Life Coach, the email address is davidcarreylifecoach@gmail.com, without that comma, of course, davidcarreylifecoach@gmail.com. And I will be glad to give you a list of the prophecies as we go along and develop them so that you can have them to reference there. But P8 through P12 means prophecy 8, prophecy 9, prophecy 10, prophecy 11, prophecy 12, and they're all regarding global events, some good, some bad, interestingly. But this is very significant in the light of that and what is shaping up worldwide, because what is pretty much thought by most of the eschatological or end time scholars, as well as a lot of the people who are not concerned about Bible prophecy, is that this could be a very good indicator of something that will require something global in response. And what will that be? Well, there are some big organizations that are working on this, that are really very much tuned in, that have nothing to do with the Holy Bible, could care less about God, probably. But they are saying that this is going to be a time when there may need to be some very big reorganizing on the world scene as far as economies go. And so with that in mind, in fact, let's go to the next slide. Because of interest this week, we have the report that Bill Gates gives $200 million towards global digital ID system. Now, what does that have to do with the world economy or any of these other big events? Well, it's quite serious, actually, because as many of you know, Bill Gates did work up a patent, got a patent back in 2020. And at the time, many of us did not have a clue what the patent was about. It didn't make sense to tie together cryptocurrency and biofeedback, or giving information back about human body. And what now, after we've had this pandemic, and what people are seeing as very, very interesting, is that what is being proposed, and Bill Gates is right there in the middle of it all, is having this digital ID system that not only tracks who's been vaccinated or who has good health and who doesn't, but also putting in place a system that allows those in need of medical help, but also financial help and assistance in other ways, to be tracked and have this worldwide system that allows currency to be used as either a reward or taxing people who they disagree with. And this is very significant. This is not conspiracy theory. This is what his patent is all about, and we have come since to learn of that and to hear his own explanations as to what his intent is. So that's significant. In fact, no, I thought I had a different one. I'm going to go back to him just for a minute. because I thought I had a slide on here that was also talking some about how that there are people right now. Well, PayPal, that was what it was going to be. Some of you may have heard. PayPal this week actually proposed a fine on PayPal who has access to people's money of $2,500 if they could be proven to be giving misinformation. And you heard me right. In fact, it had. If you didn't hear about it, you might not be on PayPal, because this is a very interesting development. They backed off. PayPal did definitely back off. Actually said at one point that it was a typo, but it was so hard to believe that by all the people who read what it did initially propose as an organization. But it fits in with this when you understand that whoever has access to people's bank accounts or to their personal information, and that's what a digital ID system would be about, then they have the opportunity to either put money in this process of equalizing humanity or taking money out. It's coming, and that's not a part of just conspiracy theory here. You can check this out, especially two sources if you're interested. Get a feel for this. The United Nations Agenda 2030, which is fully supported and supports another organization called the World Economic Forum. This kind of equalization is very much proposed and coming, and you'll be hearing much more about it. For time's sake, I have left off a couple other interesting events we will probably want to talk about 2 weeks from tonight. We will not be having class or an update next week. So I want to make sure you understand that now. But there are some things that you might want to watch for as you're also seeking and searching, many of you, and I appreciate the things you send to me. Many of you have shared great information. I do caution you, as I caution myself. There are sources out there that you maybe are a little over the top and are sometimes very much into conspiracy theories, but there are many that you can easily collaborate with other sources. So yes, please keep sending the information to me, because I do like to check things out as I can. And many of these things, they are happening. They're happening while you and I are sleeping, not just asleep to what's going on in the world. I'm talking about literally day in and day out, 24 hours a day. These things are taking place at an amazing rate. And it's just quite incredible. And what's interesting is many of the things you will not hear about, because there is this certain degree of censorship and people feeling what they have is the information versus what they would call misinformation. So that's a constant battle that we're facing. I do want to go to this next slide because I really feel this has to be talked more, and it hit home close. I can't name names, but I'm just going to tell you, hit really home close yesterday as I was with some dear friends. And after one had received the vaccination, within weeks, they had a cancer that they feel the two are tied together. I did not tell them about this article, but I feel like I must continue to remind us, and this is in regard to the prophecy we've numbered 7, that there would be pestilence or disease. And this is not just a virus or a bacteria or something that is small bug related. This is the big overall process of where you have large groups of population who are suffering, and in this case, the world. Suffering not just physically, but emotionally. This whole word pestilence is something that is much bigger than just the disease itself, but it is usually related to some kind of a disease. Some of you may have seen one of the articles coming out this week about this amazing uptick in the psychosis due to marijuana smoking. And that is something we'll want to talk about in coming weeks as it gains traction and we get more information. But that's pestilence. That's what we're talking about. And in this case, this headline that you see, that the vaccine injury data is saying that right now and the numbers are coming in, now it's not conspiracy. This is science with numbers, that are given from the CDC's own information, the VAERS, the reporting from professionals around the world. But the percent, 143,233% increase in cancer that they are, most of them tying to the vaccination. That's not saying the vaccine didn't do some good early on, especially with the early bug and minimizing some of the people's problems. But right now, the numbers coming in that there is so much harm in so many ways that it's quite amazing, and it would fall in that category of pestilence. Now, I go to this slide once more, and this is, I've actually had this now 3 weeks in a row because this is an amazing thing. My wife, Holly, bought this Bible, this very one that I have a picture of here on the screen. And inside the front cover where it's talking about the copyright, at the bottom is this box that talks about Tyndale House, who published the Bible, and how they are working with Wycliffe Bible translators, sharing a vision for the understandable, accurate translation of the Bible for every person in the world. And this is really significant because this is tied in with the prophecy that we studied last week, prophecy 12, where everyone would hear the gospel in their own language. And then Jesus said, and then the end will come. So this is really interesting because it says that they're planning on this with what's called Vision 2025, meaning, yes, they expect to have this in 2025 or working to that end. So it may not happen in 2025. We don't know the day or the hour the Lord's going to come. We don't know the day or the hour that everyone will hear the gospel or have access to the gospel. But this is significant, and this is so very clear and so very undeniable and non-disputable. It's so clear what is happening and ties in so clear with what Jesus said in Matthew 24. And by the way, it's referenced by others too. Book of Revelation, there's a reference. It's incredible that this prophecy is right here within a couple years. I don't know about you. I tell people I may not be around when the tribulation happens, if it's 15, 20, 30 years from now. But when this is 2 to 3 to 4, whatever years away, unless I am one of those who died sooner than others, I will be here when that happens and when the end comes. And it's just quite an amazing thing that's taking place that, again, for anyone who is just now tuning in on this or just getting a feel for some of these things, I would really like to encourage you to keep digging here and keep studying, and certainly consider what Jesus said, because I cannot emphasize enough that we're at a very exciting time in human history, and for sure in the New Testament church history. Just an amazing time that many generations watched for and thought they could be in. But this that we're talking about right here with this slide is a first in human history since the Tower of Babel, when never before has been that all of mankind could now hear and understand the great story of redemption and of God sending part of himself, in the form of his son, to die on the cross to be forgiveness of sins. It's just an amazing thing that is happening right here in front of us. So having said that, what I'd like to do is conclude the update and take a step now into what we call the End Times Update class. And that's for those who would like to take a minute and study some of the scriptures. If you're curious at all, I'd encourage you to hang on as we jump right in. This is going to be called What Jesus Said Would Happen. I'm calling it part 1 and part 2 because I felt like we really need to review part 1 quickly before we get into part 2. And I did get the correction here to a slide for prophecy 13 that last week I missed, and it was getting close to the end of class. When it's 7:59, the lights go out, and we literally we're done with the class. So I've left on purpose a little bit more time tonight than some others as we try to get into this, and I want to go ahead and spend this hour talking here about what Jesus said. And I would encourage, and some of you do share comments. My wonderful wife is with me here tonight. Are we seeing or hearing anybody saying anything at this point? Not yet. Do feel free to give thoughts, share thoughts, questions, if you like. But we'll go ahead and start out here. So what I would like to start with again is the setting. Because when we go to Matthew 24, same thing with Mark 13 and Luke 21, we have where Jesus and the disciples had come out of the temple, which I had the privilege to see the Temple Mount with some good folks from our wonderful church here in Memphis, Tennessee, USA area. But we made a trip back in June time period, and I got to see where the area was that Jesus would have come out of the temple with his disciples, and there was talk about the stones. I got to see some of these magnificent stones that they were looking at and commenting on. And Jesus, in that setting, made the comment that we read of here. He said, "You see all these things? I tell you the truth. Not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down." And then they went on. But that obviously created some curiosity. So a little later that day, they had crossed over the Kidron Valley and gone up into the Mount of Olives, which I also had the privilege to stand on and look over at the Temple Mount. So I had a feel for how far away it was. It's not as far as I expected. And the four of the disciples, Peter, James, John, and Andrew, came to Jesus and they said, "What were you talking about over there at the temple when you're talking about not one stone to be left on top of the other? What's going to be the sign?" They saw that as the sign of the end of the age, end of time there. And so that's when Jesus starts in on more prophecies. He answers a very sincere question, and I think he's giving some very straight shooting answers. I'm sure it probably had more curiosity developed. They had more curiosity than ever after they heard some of this, because a lot of it back then probably would not have made the sense that it makes to many of us, though we still have questions even today. But let's go ahead and see what he said here. And I'll go fairly quickly on this part. You see up here, it's part one I have at the heading. That was last week. And then we're going to get to part two here momentarily. But I want to just throw them at you fast. What's number two is what we're calling P2, Prophecy 2. Many will claim to be the Messiah and deceive many. From the Matthew 24:4, Jesus answered, "Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Christ, and will deceive many." Then he went on, "He will hear of wars and rumors of wars." And I'm interested right here because I'm looking back. I'm not sure I had that prophecy or number right back on the update. I'll need to correct that. This we have is Prophecy 3. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. I'm going to underline a few phrases here as we go through these, and I'm just going to mention this again tonight because there are many people who feel that this was just kind of a blob of signs that Jesus was throwing at them. But you're going to see that it's not the case, that he was very much talking a sequence of events. And I can't emphasize that enough, that it's a sequence of events, because, and you'll see it if we go along, but watch for the things I underline. I didn't even get a couple of things, and he said that we talked sequentially, but this is at the very start of what he would call the end, from what he was answering when he was answering the question of the disciples. Let's go to the next slide, which is what we call Prophecy 4. There will be conflict between people groups and countries that will increase. Verse 7, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And that word nation, ethnos, is a race or a tribe. Kingdom is a kingdom or the realm of a ruling person or party, such as a modern nation. So we're hearing a lot about conflict between races, and we're hearing a lot about conflict between countries. And that's one of the things that he would be talking of here. Number 5, there will be famines. This word famine, lemos, it's not just people dying of starvation, but it's scarcity of food, destitution. Could imply things as even supply chain and inflation and what people are able to spend on food. But this is the full meaning of that word that Jesus said there would be that taking place. So there would be great earthquakes. This word is important. There will be earthquakes in various places. That word earthquake, seismos. That's a shaking, a shock, or caused by earthquakes, ocean waves, or a gale of wind. It's not just referring to earthquakes as it's used in translating other places when it did talk of more than that. So it's a very significant word that implies what we could be seeing with hurricanes and typhoons, volcanoes, all the things that are earth shaking or you and me shaking. That's what's implied here by this word. And yes, these have been since the beginning of time. You're right. We all know it. And yet somewhere in this, by what we've heard and what we've talked, there is the increase of intensity and frequency. And I just saw an article last week that did indicate that there are many scientists feeling that there is some of that taking place. We'll probably get more statistics on that here before long. The next one, number 7, there will be disease. We talked about this a bit ago in regard to pestilence. This is, again, using this phrase from Luke 21, not Matthew 24, but it ties in. There will be great earthquakes, famines, and pestilences in various places. And that word, lumos, pestilence, it's a deadly infectious malady, widespread sickness causing death. But it's, as I said, it even has been used and translated in the original language to imply or mean an oppression on people. So it's a very broad field there that Jesus said would be taking place. That's the 7th one. Going quickly here is this review. Christ's followers will be persecuted and killed, hated by all people groups. Verse 9, then you'll be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. Notice that phrase, all nations. If I had been underlining words and phrases that have to indicate what this amazing time of global and worldwide and many, many, many people, you would find that quite interesting. That's a study all of its own. And I would encourage you to read down through this to see how many times that's referenced. But here are 2 words being used. Persecuted has to do with this, it's thlipsis, pressure, literally and figuratively. It's an anguish, it's a burden, it's what people are feeling for doing right or being right or identifying with righteousness. Or in this case, in fact, I'm tempted to get sidetracked and tell some stories here, what I saw in the news, but just to say we are seeing people, whether they're shop owners or hospital personnel or others, who are taking a stand for what they see as truth or goodness, and they are literally losing jobs over that. In this article was pointing that out. But there is the other, and that is the being killed, which, yes, the Christian martyrs are seeming to be in great number in many countries overall. And we haven't seen much in America, but you do hear of it other places. In Voice of the Martyrs online, you can find an app and see a whole lot there that indicates this is present day. And it is speculated that more have died for the faith in the last couple of years than ever in the history of Christianity. So it is very much happening. Back to what I said again, intensity, frequency, those are things that play out very much here in what Jesus had to say. Let's go to number 9. Many of Christ's followers would stop believing and turn on each other. Verse 10 says, at that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. But here's the idea of many turn away. Polus, many most large, turn away, apostasy, to stumble, to fall, being enticed into sin. The idea of betrayal, of hating. And there is, in fact, well, again, this is not the update hour, but this is a time to tell you, yes, you're picking up on this probably in social media, and will more and more. And it's just hard to see sometimes what I see happening between, especially adult children and adult parents. It's just incredible the amount of hatred that exists. And a lot of these people are professing believers, but there's just an intensity there that I find myself shaking my head as it's quite intense. Let's go to number 10. Many false prophets would appear and deceive many. This is not like the false Christ spoken of back in the second prophecy. This is false prophets that would appear and deceive many. And this is a word that, again, is broader than what we might think of often, but these are religious imposters. These are people who claim to know what things are about spiritual. And when you have certain people who are holding to certain beliefs as spiritual beliefs, some of them are far out, but it sure fits this very thing. Whether this is the time of this at the moment or not, I don't know. But we are seeing a great deal of religious teaching that's going on, at least teaching in the name of religion, that is not based on anything we would understand as true. So that's worth noting. Let's go to the next, which is prophecy 11. The love of many will grow cold as wickedness increases. This is verse 12. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. This wickedness is the word lawlessness, unrighteousness. And I think you just about would have to be totally in a state of denial or negligent if you could not see a lot of this that's taking place. Is this referring to now? Again, some of this we're going to come to a conclusion to more and more as we do the updates. But I would say that what we're, again, more aware of is this, in part because there is an intensity and also because of the communication that is taking place globally, worldwide. It's just incredible, the whole idea of lawlessness, and where good is called bad and bad is called good. I talked about that, and that's a prophecy by several in the scriptures that this would take place. Let's go to the next, which is number 12. This is the one I referenced with my wife Holly's Bible inside the cover, saying that this is the Vision 2025 that Tyndale and the Bible translator, Wycliffe Bible translators are talking about. They're saying that the gospel will be preached to all people groups. And what's underlined there, verse 14, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations. Could have underlined that back to this whole thing about all. And then the end will come. So we had, this is not the end. I didn't have the scripture in there down around verse 5 or 6 somewhere, where it said these are the beginning of birth pains, but here we have, and then the end will come. So these things that we've been talking about, the first 11 prophecies, or at least most of them, would probably be experienced fairly plainly, clearly around the world, so that people would know and identify these are things that Jesus said would happen. Well, this is one that is global, and of course we probably would think of it as a good type of prophecy. And yet here we are. This is how close we are to what Jesus said in verse 14 would happen. And I'm just a scrapper in life and a human like you, and a seeker and a student. I will say, as I've told several, I probably would not be taking any of this serious had I not had a very unusual event happen back in 2014, where a lady here in Memphis had no idea she was being used by the good Lord to wake me up, but I overheard her talking to some people at the Memphis Light, Gas and Water, and it was very obvious that there was a concern and a problem. And in talking with her, I won't tell the whole story now, but it really woke me up. And I came home telling my wife the story, and she, I would say, also woke up enough that we both felt we started thinking serious, not only about the state of our world, but to think about where we at in terms of prophecy. And this has been a study since. We have a lot yet to learn, but I will tell you what we're studying here and going to for the next few weeks. You will find this is not that complicated. This right here, this 12th prophecy that we're going to call prophecy 12. This is not that complicated, is it? I mean, you can read it, you can understand it, you can say that's pretty simple. And now when we see that it's happening, we probably should find a little bit of excitement for those of us who believe, and probably a little concern for those who don't. something to kind of stir the emotion a little bit, because we've got people who've been working on this, getting the gospel preached to all people. They've been working on it for decades, and now they're saying, in part thanks to technology, but also in part to other people taking part in the project, it's going to happen, and soon. And Jesus said, when that happens, then the end will come. I think that's very significant, and it ought to be an alarm clock of sorts for all of us if we're asleep into the whole topic here of the end times. Now let's go to the next, because after the end will come, we have Jesus. It's almost like he's shifting gears, but it's not. It's because this is where I think he would say we have the end. And I think this is in part what many people would, and I think you'll see it as we study scriptures in the next few weeks. This is where Jesus clearly talks about what Daniel and Paul and John in Revelation, what they talk about in terms of the tribulation. This is kind of the kickoff. This is at the start. This is somewhere in the beginning of. And here in this passage right here, where we're calling it prophecy 13, the abomination or lawless one will stand in the holy place, the temple. Those references are all, and I just have to assure you, those are scriptural references that are used synonymously and a reference to regularly. So it's not a question here as to what they mean. But Jesus, when he in verses 15 and 16 says, so when you see standing in the holy place, quote, the abomination that causes desolation, unquote, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, even tells you where this was prophesied in the Old Testament. Let the reader understand, and let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So at this point, this is the end. Jesus said, then the end will come. And here is what's going to happen. We, the world, will see this lawless one, this abomination that Daniel referenced in his own prophecy, standing in the holy place. Now, there could be some people who would go, is it the location of the holy place, or will there actually be a temple? We've talked in the last couple of weeks about there are actually Jews right now fully bent. In fact, this week there were several articles that came out. They are fully determined to have a new temple. And in fact, one of the interesting sites, you might want to check it out. It's called the TempleMountInstitute.com. And what they're saying there is that there's this group of Jews. They're not even Messianic Jews that I know of. They are just regular Jewish people who feel very excited at the prospects that they are going to have the opportunity to build a third temple, a new temple. And they are working hard at it. In fact, we shared a couple weeks ago that just in the last 4 or 5 weeks now, a red heifer, 5 of them actually, were delivered to Tel Aviv, flown there from Texas, of all places. And that's after 10 years of this group, the Temple Mount Institute, trying to find a heifer to fulfill one of the requirements of purification for the temple, to have a perfect red heifer. And that's happened. They now have a perfect red heifer, and 5 of them, it's supposed, there in Israel. Now, if that doesn't kind of interest you in terms of timing, would these be one of those used in the sacrifice? But I can also tell you, as I mentioned a bit ago, I had the privilege to be in Israel just a few weeks ago. I guess it's been a few months now, back early June, but we were at the Temple Mount Institute, and supposedly not allowed to take pictures. They told me a little bit too late. I happen to have some good pictures of some of the things that they have made already. This group of people, this Temple Mount Institute, they have made these and fully expect to put them in the new temple. They're made to specs. They're finished up there, and there's even an altar, mind you, an altar that is there, ready to. It's assembled, semi-assembled, but it's ready to be taken down piece by piece and put back together as soon as this third temple is built. Now, tell me that's not quite exciting and interesting, because it figures into this prophecy where, yes, it seems quite likely there will be a temple that the abomination, the lawless one, will stand in. And I find that quite fascinating. Very fascinating, and also quite much in the near future, seeming like it's pending just right here before long. But one of the things the Temple Mount Institute did this week that I saw, and I get notifications from them. I'm not sure it's Facebook or YouTube or somewhere. You can too. You can sign up, subscribe, but they will tell you what they're doing. And this week, they had a priest up there who was pointing out where on the Temple Mount, because believe it or not, it used to be never was a Jew allowed up on the Temple Mount with the Muslims that control it, keeping all that very much their land and their setting. But now they are letting people up on the Temple Mount, Jews, to take a look and to feel like they're getting close to where the Holy of Holies would have been, because that's very special and meaningful to Jewish people, as you'd expect. And they had this priest that was pointing out areas on the Temple Mount where going to the left of that building is where they would put the new Holy of Holies in the temple. And it's very interesting. And they are dreaming big, and they are counting the days, so to speak. They are very interested in seeing this take place. So this is a very interesting process that we will be watching for and listening for as things shape up and develop. And I do expect to see this in my lifetime because of everything else that is happening. Somebody recently described what's happening as a confluence, meaning there are all these prophecies that are happening simultaneously, and they're happening so supernaturally. There's no way any man or any earthly leader could pull this stuff off, because a lot of it has to do with things that are way bigger than man-made organizations when you start talking about science and geopolitical events and things of that nature. You couldn't make these things happen just with a few men, though there will be one man that's very influential, obviously, for a short time in the world scene. But what's happening at breakneck speed are all these things at once, and they're all working towards this that Jesus describes. It's very fascinating, and something only God could orchestrate. Having said that, let's go to the 14th one. Jesus says there will be great distress in Jerusalem and Judea, verses 21-22. For then there will be great distress unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. Now tell me that's not interesting, because, first of all, I mean, yes, for those of us Gentiles or people that are not in Israel, it's nice to hear this is happening over there on the one hand. On the other hand, what a powerful thing that is going to take place. So, yes, some of you are thinking probably as you're listening to this, well, hey, how about Iran and Russia and some of these countries that are already talking together and wanting to wipe Israel off the face of the earth? Well, yes, and if you were to study, we will be looking at the study of the scripture in Ezekiel 38, where it does talk about armies from the north coming down. And no doubt what Jesus is talking about right here was prophesied way back 1,500 years or so before him. And he's just, again, playing out, he's saying what's going to happen. It's talked about on through the New Testament. So this is a very interesting thing that's going to happen. Now, I need to probably say, even though this is really Jerusalem, Judea centered on this particular bit of demise, that it says if the days hadn't been cut short, no one would survive. I don't know if nuclear war comes to your mind with something like that, but when Jesus said back there in that first prophecy that got the attention of the disciples, that not one stone would be left on top of the other. By the way, at least one of the stones we saw was bigger than my office. It's huge. And he said, not one of these, and there were several rows of these stones, not one would be left stand on top of the other. It's going to take something pretty significant, and what's described here would certainly play out, wouldn't it? It would certainly sound like this is the very thing that Jesus was describing when, if the days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days, they'll be shortened. And Ezekiel 38 and 39 actually gives us an idea of how this happens, that God intervenes. And it's really quite an interesting story. We'll study that another time. Let's go on to number 15. And that is, false Christs and prophets will perform great signs and miracles and deceive the elect. verses 23, 24. At that time, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. And when you read, and especially in Revelation, it's amazing what's described there about even, I mean, we're not talking just magician acts that you might see in Las Vegas. We're talking about calling fire out of the sky and amazing miracles. Even again, one who had died coming back to life. It's really a convincing, powerful type things that are going to be taking place. So that's one of the things Jesus is talking about here that, again, I think very well with the coverage. We will probably be seeing news coverage. We'll be seeing some of this in time, and it will be quite amazing. Quite amazing. Hold on to your hats. Yeah, let's go to the next thing here, prophecy 16. And I want you to notice something here in verse 29, because I could have underlined this word, and I should have, where he's quoting, and he says, immediately after the distress of those days, the sun. Do you get the feel here that, again, it's not the beginning, it's not the end yet. It's the birth pains, then the end will come. He uses these words, and now he's saying, after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. So there will be terrifying, catastrophic events in the heavens. And that's something I can hardly fathom, but this is mentioned again in Daniel. It's mentioned in the book of Revelations. This is very much a part of what is talked about here at this end time. And it's right here in this list that Jesus is giving. After he's not talking like the Revelation that John received. This is Jesus talking very specifics. He's quoting even out of the Old Testament prophecies. He's given them a feel of how it all fits together. And this is a very significant thing when you keep seeing these words after, and the sense of sequence of events. He's being very helpful to try to not just help his disciples at that time, but to help all those who would follow as disciples through the ages to have an understanding. He was writing this for you and me. He was saying this. The disciples, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and then John with his Revelation, very clearly this is for the generation that would be affected. And Jesus, even later on in chapter 10, Matthew 25, in this case, he even, and you might want to read ahead, he talks about this is going to happen in one generation. All of these things, when you see these things start to happen, this generation will not pass away until these things take place. So what is a generation? Well, we don't know for sure. 70 years, 72 years, expectancy at that time, just what? But it is something that's going to happen at a certain time and in a certain way. Let's go now to the next. We're getting close to the end, 17. On the earth, so we just talked about the heavens with the earth, moon, stars. On the earth, there will be roaring, tossing of the sea that will cause alarm. And as Dr. Luke, the disciple Luke, writes, there will even be hearts failing for fear. This is how amazing this will be. We see things now. I'm intrigued sometimes when I hear of catastrophes on the news, and we hear of terrible things happening, and it has a ill effect. It makes me feel even unsettled and yuck in a certain way that I can't even describe emotionally. But when you hear these other things happening, can you imagine if you read Revelations and some of the things that are going to happen? I mean, this is amazing type stuff that will truly test our not just emotional well-being, but our physical well-being. It's that kind of incredible, and that's why I think it's all the more reason that we as believers need to have a feel. In fact, Jesus says it for this very reason. We're to be alert, we're to be aware, we're to understand the times. He says, in fact, it starts out in the book of Revelation, we're blessed if we study them and know them. We're blessed because what? Does it mean that we escape? No, I'm sorry. It doesn't mean we escape everything. But it means that we understand, and we understand what we are to do and how faith works, and we understand the importance of God being close in our lives. We are blessed in the midst of the worst of times and situations. And that's one thing that comes out of this whole study as you go through it. But here's on the earth. There'll be signs in the sun, moon, and stars on the earth. Nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. Men will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on the world, for the heavenly bodies will be shaken. And that whole thing of faint is the idea of hearts failing them for fear. Translated even that way in some translations. Then we'll go, I'm calling the next one a sign because it's kind of like the end event of the end times. And it's really kind of an amazing thing here. So how are we doing on time? We're wrapping up here pretty good. I've gone very fast, talked very fast. And for those of you following along, I hope that you're getting this bird's eye view and a good feel. But let's go here to the 18th, and I'm calling it the 18th prophecy, when some might say that's not a sign. That's it. That's the end. That's what the signs were building up to. But I'm going to, just for the sake of getting it on the record, let's go here. Because at that time, the Son of Man will come on the clouds in great power and glory. Verses 30 and 31. At that time, and see what I have underlined again, at that time. I don't know how to say all these things more clear than what Jesus said them. There was a time I missed all of this. I did not see that there was a sequence of events here. But now that I see it, I see where all the other scriptures support it and they fit in. Let's read the scripture. I want to tell you about one of those. At that time, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and all the nations of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. So this whole idea of gathering, that's a key word in this phrase, a key word, because this refers, many, if not most, scholars who study the end times, that this is his second return and has what Paul talks about, the resurrection of the dead, and that there'll be those that meet Christ in the air. So there's this whole idea of what they call the rapture, and it's a good word. I think it says it pretty well. Describes what's going to take place, and this is a very exciting time and event. We're going to study to where I'm working even now on a chart. I'd like to have it where we can eventually kind of plug in all the prophecies, kind of in the order he gives, but also more than that, even from the Old Testament prophets and through with Paul and John, to where there's a feel for the events. Because in Revelation, after we have what this event appears to be, as found in, by the way, Revelation 14, for those who want to talk about the Son of Man on a cloud and going to harvest the earth. There is something that happens where God's wrath is really shown for those who accept the mark of the beast, which we'll also talk about. But there is a time of God's wrath on that people, those people on earth, that is just amazing. And it's described in those next few 15, 16 chapters. You have this fall, this great country Babylon, which many people think is America. It sounds like it kind of when you read about it. Don't know that for sure yet. But you have that. And then you have events that play out up until the time there is a new heaven and a new earth. Because we have what appears to be the second coming of Christ, and then it appears that there is another coming of Christ with his army to win in the final conquest that puts Satan away forever. And but it's not. He puts it away for 1,000 years, and then there's another final conquest. But at that time, what we might call the third coming, I don't like using that phrase, but that's when we have that Jesus will stand there in Jerusalem, and there'll be this earthquake that splits the Mount of Olives open, and water flows to both seas, which I'm assuming is the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean. But it's just quite an amazing set of events. I'd like to do a chart that plays it all out. But for this event, this sign, one of the most interesting scriptures. You can read it, those of you who are studying, 1 Thessalonians 4 and then 2 Thessalonians. Paul talks about it quite a bit right there to the Thessalonian church. And it's just really fascinating, talking about the rapture and the resurrection of the dead there in 1 Thessalonians 4, I believe it is. But one of the things that is just so amazing is that 2 Thessalonians 2, when he is saying that, he said, now I know it's been rumored, some of you are thinking that Christ may have already come back, whether you think you misunderstood a letter I wrote, or somebody else said I said it, or somebody has reported it somehow. But he said, I want to assure you, church, Thessalonian church, that Christ is not coming back until two things happen. Until there's a great falling away, which Jesus talked about, and until this lawless one is standing in the temple. So here you have some very clear indicators that really suggest, again, they're all on the same page in the Bible. We as modern Christians have a little problem on the same page, and there's a lot yet to understand, but it's not as complicated. And I want to give you that hope. It's not as complicated, and there's a way for us to really experience a sense of God's help. And as we grow, each one of us in the faith, as we come to understand things better, I think that we'll all have a little better fine-tuned relationship with the Lord, as it'll give us a sense of urgency. So here we are, wrapping things up another week. Hope this has been helpful to you. Feel free to subscribe to the channel there on YouTube. Share it if you feel somebody you know might be interested. I wouldn't push it on anybody that's not, or they'll just resist. But it can be, I think, of help to people who are seeking and wanting to have a feel for what's happening and to connect dots with scriptures, modern day events. So we will look forward. I think I'm about to get the sign that lights are going out. That's it for this time. God bless you, each one.